In 1950, the highest-ranking scientific advisor to the United States President made a bold, chilling declaration. The age of the tank was dead. In the dawn of the atomic age, where strategic bombers and nuclear-armed aircraft carriers dominated the defense budget, armored warfare was suddenly viewed as a relic of the past. Why build a 50-ton steel box when a single bomb could erase a city? Or when a single infantryman with a bazooka could reduce a tank to a burning coffin? Yet, just a decade after its supposed death, America would roll out a massive, towering steel behemoth, a vehicle originally designed as a mere interim stopgap, which somehow survived congressional cancellations, disastrous technological experiments, and the shifting sands of global warfare. It would go on to stand guard against the Soviet Union for over 30 years. How did a weapon that was entirely written off become the ultimate guardian of the Cold War? And what secret discovery inside a besieged British embassy forced the Americans to build it in the first place? At the end of the Second World War, the American military machine downsized with breathtaking speed. The defense budget was ruthlessly slashed, and what little money remained was funneled directly into the nuclear program. The Air Force got the strategic bombers, the Navy got the supercarriers. The Army? The Army was left holding on to its aging fleet of M26 Pershing tanks. They knew they needed to upgrade the Pershing, adding a bore evacuator, a muzzle brake, and a new engine, but there was no urgency. The top brass genuinely believed that future wars would be fought with atoms, not armor. Then came June 1950. The outbreak of the Korean War shattered the atomic illusion. Suddenly, the United States realized they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Tanks were not obsolete. In fact, in the brutal, grinding terrain of Korea, they were desperately needed. In a panic, the US rushed out whatever they had left: older Shermans, Chaffees, and the upgraded Pershings, now designated the M46 Patton. It was an emergency measure, an act of desperation. They followed it with the M47, merging a new turret onto the proven Pershing hull. But the Americans knew they were falling behind. Behind the scenes, development accelerated on a true next-generation tank, the M48. It featured a heavily armored, dome-like turret, resembling an upturned wok, designed to deflect incoming rounds. The military ordered the M48 into production before the pilot models had even finished their trials. The urgency was palpable. But over in Europe, a terrifying new threat was about to emerge. A threat that would render the M48 obsolete almost as soon as it hit the production line. In 1956, the streets of Budapest erupted in rebellion against Soviet rule. The Red Army responded with brutal, overwhelming armored force. During the chaos, something extraordinary happened. A group of rebels managed to drive a captured Soviet T-54 tank directly into the compound of the British embassy. For Western intelligence, this was the Holy Grail. A British defense attaché seized the opportunity, quietly slipping out with measuring tools to inspect the beast. What they discovered sent shockwaves through NATO. The T-54's frontal armor was astoundingly thick and perfectly angled. Worse, it was armed with a massive 100mm gun. The terrifying truth was undeniable. The current tanks in Western arsenals could not reliably penetrate the Soviet armor, but the Soviet gun could effortlessly tear through theirs. The United States could not ignore this. By September 1957, Congress and the military cleared the decks. They initiated the M60 program. The mission was absolute. Build a main battle tank capable of destroying the latest Soviet armor. To kill a T-54, you need a bigger gun. The Americans tested 6 different cannons at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. They looked at a massive 120mm gun originally designed for their heavy tanks, but the ammunition was 2-piece, meaning it took twice as long to load. In a medium tank turret, it was a logistical nightmare. The solution came from across the Atlantic. The British, spurred by the exact same intelligence from the Hungarian embassy, had developed the legendary L7100 5mm rifled gun. It was a masterpiece of engineering. Firing armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds, its accuracy and lethal penetrating power were unmatched. The Americans adopted it immediately. But a great gun needs a great platform, and the engineers had some incredibly radical and dangerous ideas for how to protect it. When designing the armor for the M60, American engineers flirted with science fiction. They experimented with fused silica armor, essentially encasing massive glass inserts between sheets of solid steel to defeat shaped charges. They designed the new tank with a flat, straight front to accommodate these revolutionary silica armor packs. But there was a catch. The manufacturing process was a nightmare. Production facilities couldn't make enough of it. The silica armor was quietly scrapped, leaving the M60 with heavily sloped, homogeneous steel armor, up to 6 inches thick on the front, offering roughly 10 inches of horizontal equivalent protection. They retained the classic boat-shaped hull of the M48. Its rounded bottom was a brutal necessity of the Cold War battlefield. If the tank struck a landmine, the blast would be vented outward, rather than trapped underneath to flip the 50-ton machine. And then there was the heart of the beast. The military had grown tired of gasoline engines that turned tanks into fireballs when hit. They mandated diesel. The M60 was fitted with the massive AVDS 1790 diesel engine, producing a thunderous 750 horsepower. To fit this colossal power plant, the M60 had to be big, very big. While the Soviets were building ultra-low profile tanks to hide in the brush, the Americans went the opposite direction. The M60 towered over 10 feet tall. With its massive commander's cupola housing a fully rotating 50 caliber machine gun, it was an imposing, unmistakable silhouette on the horizon. By the early 1960s, the M60 was rolling off the production lines. It featured aluminum road wheels to save weight, a coincidence rangefinder, and an overpressure NBC system to protect the crew from the radioactive fallout of a nuclear World War III. It was a formidable machine. But here is the most fascinating irony of the M60's history. The US Army never actually wanted to keep it. The M60 was officially viewed as a stopgap, an interim model. Throughout the 1960s, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara championed a joint American-German super project known as the MBT-70. This was supposed to be the true tank of the future, destined to replace the M60 within a decade. But the MBT-70 was a catastrophic failure. Plagued by budget overruns, conflicting national interests, and over-ambitious technology, the joint program collapsed. Congress was furious. Suddenly, the interim tank was the only tank. The M60 was forced to soldier on. And to keep it relevant against rapidly advancing Soviet armor, the Americans had to relentlessly upgrade it. They quickly rolled out the M60A1, replacing the original dome turret with a narrower, sleeker needle-nose design. It presented a much smaller target from the front and provided a massive bustle in the back to store more of that deadly 105mm ammunition. By 1975, the fleet was sent back for the RISE program. Reliability improved selected equipment. They overhauled the engine, upgraded the tracks to a new NATO standard with replaceable rubber pads to avoid tearing up European highways. And crucially, they introduced an advanced gun stabilization system. For the first time, an M60 crew could accurately fire their main gun while moving across rough terrain. boasting a 70% chance of a first-round hit at 2,000 meters. But the US military was still obsessed with cutting-edge technology, and that obsession was about to lead them into one of the most embarrassing technological blunders of the Cold War. Throughout the 1960s, military theorists became infatuated with a new idea: missiles. A standard tank gun was deadly at 2,000 meters, but a guided missile could hit a target at 4,000, maybe even 6,000 meters, with a 90% kill probability. Why rely on conventional ballistics when you could steer death straight into the enemy? This theoretical dream birthed the M60A2. To accommodate the new weapon, engineers designed a bizarre, radically smaller turret. The commander was pushed to the very back in an elevated dome, while the loader and gunner sat up front. Its primary weapon was a massive 152mm gun launcher. It could fire conventional high-explosive rounds, but its true purpose was to fire the shillelagh anti-tank guided missile. Because it relied on such complex, untested electronics, crews mockingly nicknamed it the Starship. And much like a fictional spaceship, it spent most of its time broken down. The Starship was an unmitigated disaster. The guidance system required the tank to remain completely stationary, while the relatively slow missile flew toward its target. A fatal flaw on a fluid, fast-paced battlefield. Worse, the system was incredibly fragile. The locking key that held the missile in the tube caused the barrels to crack under pressure. Misfires were rampant. The vacuum tubes and early electronics couldn't handle the brutal shocks of armored warfare. By 1981, after building just 540 of them, the US military quietly gave up. The Starships were phased out, their turrets scrapped, proving that sometimes bleeding-edge technology is no match for reliable, proven steel. While the Americans were struggling with missile experiments, the M60 was actually fighting for its life in the hands of foreign militaries. In October 1973, the Yom Kippur War erupted. The Israeli Defense Forces relied heavily on the M60 against massive coalitions of Soviet-supplied armor. In the brutal, sweltering combat of the Sinai and the Golan Heights, the M60 proved its lethality. The Israelis learned hard lessons about the vulnerability of tanks to man-portable missiles. In response, they revolutionized armored defense by covering their M60s in blazer explosive reactive armor, blocks of explosives that detonated outward to disrupt incoming shaped charges. The Americans watched closely, eventually adopting similar armor packages for their own fleets. As the 1980s dawned, the long-awaited M1 Abrams finally began to arrive. But there were thousands of M60s still holding the line. They received their final, ultimate upgrade, the M60A3. Fitted with advanced solid-state ballistic computers, halon fire suppression systems, and crucially, thermal imaging sights, the M60A3 could finally dominate the night. The American M60s finally saw their own large-scale combat, not in the Fulda Gap of Germany, but in the deserts of the Middle East. During the 1991 Gulf War, the United States Marine Corps spearheaded the liberation of Kuwait using M60A1s. Charging through the black smoke of burning oil wells, the aging Cold War Guardians utterly decimated Iraqi T-55s and T-62s. Today, more than 6 decades after it was born as a rushed interim solution, the M60 continues to serve. Massive modernized fleets still form the backbone of armored forces in nations like Egypt and Turkey. There are those who argue about the M60's place in history. Was it a waste of taxpayer money, considering it spent most of its life parked in West German forests, waiting for a Soviet invasion that never came? Was it a failure because it wasn't the most technologically perfect tank on paper? The answer lies in the reality of deterrence. For over 30 years, thousands of M60s and their dedicated crews sat on the bleeding edge of the Iron Curtain. They were the shield that ensured the Cold War never went hot. They did their job perfectly. They held the line, and they won the greatest conflict of the 20th century, simply by being too formidable to challenge.